Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, a stark climate warning today. It's now or never to change our ways. Just when figures show there was an absolute stampede to buy gas-guzzling vehicles before the ute tax came into force. It's day one without compulsory vaccine passes, but one Dunedin bar reckons they're a keeper. We talked to the owner. And when is a nightclub not a nightclub? The venue's selling tickets and saying they're private parties. Fewer than half of us vote in the local body elections. Come on, people, it's time to get excited about the race for the mayoral chains. We've got something a little nutty too, the ambitious plan to grow eco-almonds in the Hawke's Bay. Don't forget, you can check us out on Sky Channel 83 or Freeview Channel 50.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. Ahi Marie, I'm Evie Ashton. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has rejected claims by Russia's embassy in New Zealand that images of atrocities being committed in Ukraine are a hoax. The embassy made the claims on Facebook, describing the footage as a staged provocation. Ms Ardern says she clearly disagrees and has warned against disinformation on social media. She says there's certainly evidence of war crimes.
Many of us have seen some of the images. I have seen some myself that are outside of the public domain, and it again reinforces to me the importance of New Zealand's efforts to ensure that Russia is held to account through the International Criminal Court.
Asked who shared the images with her, Jacinda Ardern said she was in contact with her Ukrainian counterparts. A former School Strike for Climate organiser is calling on people to shift their thinking around climate change. The latest International Climate Change report was released today and contains a plan to keep global warming below 1.5 degrees by 2050. Sophie Handford, now a Kapiti District Councillor, says climate change is more than just a scientific issue.
That's been the challenge, is trying to get people from just thinking about climate change as a scientific issue, and one which obviously, means we need to reduce emissions to see us tackling the climate crisis, to also thinking about the lives and livelihoods that it affects now and that it will continue to affect in the future.
The Prime Minister agrees the time for action is now and says the government will be releasing its plan shortly. Workers are returning to offices full of empty desks, blank screens and quiet staff rooms as Auckland moves past its Omicron peak. Sam Ollie reports.
Microsoft's latest work trend report says 1 in 3 New Zealand employers will need their teams to go back into the office full-time in the next year. The migration back to CBDs has begun. Spark reopened its 14 corporate offices across the country this week. Fonterra did the same, inviting back 1,500 workers. About 50% have taken up the offer so far. Vodafone is reopening its Christchurch, Wellington and Auckland bases next Monday, but with split teams working alternate days. Councils are also loosening restrictions, including the Auckland and Hamilton City Councils, who ditched mandates today.
A Wellington bar owner says parties taking place at other venues seem clearly not permitted under the red light settings. Some venues have been publicly advertising and hosting gatherings, but describing them as private, so guests don't have to follow the hospitality rules of mask wearing and seated service. Tim Ward owns San Fran, Abandoned Brewery and Club 121. He says he's seen a number of parties in Courtney Place clubs. While he's not following suit, he says he understands why venues under intense pressure from the restrictions want to take the risk. The Workplace Relations Minister says the Fair Pay Agreements Bill will stop the race to the bottom on wages. The legislation, in its first reading today, will create a new system for workers and unions to negotiate minimum pay and working conditions across industries. Michael Wood says it will give workers who we relied on during the pandemic, such as cleaners and security guards, livable wages. Both National and ACT oppose the bill, arguing it's unionism by stealth that will impose more costs on businesses. Aucklanders are facing an increase in their water and wastewater costs. Charges will rise by 7% on July the 1st. Watercare Chief Executive John Lamont says the rise was first signalled in late 2020, and while COVID pressures have meant higher operating costs since, it will stick to the 7%.
We don't want to do extra harm to people. People have had it tough. So we're sticking with the price path. What it works out at for a household who uses average water usage is about $1.50 a week. And our board have confirmed that it still feels that right price path so we can carry on delivering the infrastructure, carry on delivering the services that we need to.
To sport, and coach Gary Stead believes the Black Caps were the victims of their own success this summer. New Zealand hold the Cricket World Test Championship title. They're the number 1 ranked ODI team and 4th in the T20 standings. The Black Caps have completed their season at home with a one-day series sweep of the Netherlands, but had drawn test series against Bangladesh and South Africa.
When you start to become more successful, I think, then you're, portrayed that you should be winning all the time, and it's very, very difficult to do. And we're a small cricketing nation that keeps trying to fight as hard as we can every game, and we will continue to try and do that.
Wimbledon may ban world men's tennis number 2 Daniil Medvedev from this year's tournament over fears a Russian victory could boost Vladimir Putin's regime. The All England club has been advised its independent status means it could ban Russian and Belarusian players who failed to denounce Putin and the war against Ukraine. Tiger mania has returned to Augusta National as a cagey Tiger Woods keeps the golf world guessing on whether he'll compete in the Masters this week. The 15-time major winner says his Masters participation will be a last-minute decision. If he does play, it will be the first official tournament for him since November 2020. And Sunday's ANZ Premiership netball between the Tactics and Mystics has been postponed, with the Christchurch-based Tactics unable to field a team due to COVID. That's the news.
Climate Division.
The charge that Groundswell are laying, which is that we're not listening to farmers, is total bollocks. We're bending over backwards listening to farmers and farming organisations.
Criminal accusations.
Putin's war is actually creating not only significant war crimes, there's no word to describe the abhorrent images of civilians that have been decimated.
And consular services.
I, for the life of me, do not understand why the Russian ambassador is still in New Zealand. Why do we need that?
Full coverage. Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And we're funded through New Zealand On Air. You're with Lisa Owen on Checkpoint next. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. For Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty, mostly cloudy with a few showers. Thunderstorms are possible for Northland and Eastern Bay of Plenty tomorrow morning. From Waikato to Wellington, also Taupo, Taumarunui and Taihape. Isolated showers are turning to rain this evening with some heavy falls and possible morning thunderstorms for Taranaki and Waitomo. Rain is easing tomorrow evening. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly fine. However, scattered rain tonight and tomorrow morning for those areas. There are a few showers developing in Wairarapa tomorrow evening. For Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, becoming fine tomorrow. A few showers in Nelson, but brief rain tonight and again tomorrow afternoon and then fine. For Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered rain is developing this afternoon, becoming widespread tomorrow morning and then easing tomorrow evening. Occasional rain or showers for Otago and Southland, and for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy, a few showers tomorrow and then rain for tomorrow night. It's 7 minutes past 5. We'll have news headlines for you at 5:30.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's now or never time for a revolution. But it appears we are slow learners because on the day UN scientists issued that stark warning about the state of the planet, it's emerged Kiwis have flocked in their thousands to buy gas-guzzling vehicles before new taxes came into force. More on that in a moment. In the latest climate report, the UN says we're on course for devastating changes to our climate, and don't we know it here in New Zealand. NIWA's March climate summary out today reported much higher than average sea temperatures, significant rainfall and flooding in the north, drought in the south, and the highest ever mean maximum temperatures in 18 locations. The UN report says greenhouse gas emissions must peak within the next 3 years if we're to stave off the worst effects. Here's the BBC's Justin Rowlett.
What the UN has published today is a roadmap for saving the world from the worst of climate change. But it comes with a massive warning. It is now or never. There can be no more broken promises on climate, says the UN.
Some government and business leaders are saying one thing but doing another. Simply put, they are lying. And the results will be catastrophic.
But there is some good news in today's report, so let's start there. The cost of renewable technologies, wind turbines, solar panels, batteries have been falling far quicker than anyone expected. As a result, the world is rapidly building solar and wind plants. In fact, last year, 10% of global electricity was generated from renewables, according to a report last week. But, says the UN, harnessing the power of the sun and the wind will not be enough. The report details how we'll also need to change the way we get around, what we eat, how efficient our homes and businesses are, how we farm, how we produce the goods we buy, how we move those goods around, and how we protect the natural world. In short, pretty much everything has to change because pretty much everything we do produces carbon dioxide. It is possible, says today's report, but time is almost out. We've got to peak carbon emissions before 2025, says the UN, and then cut them back by at least 43% by the end of 2030. And then we need to take them all the way down to net zero by 2050. It is a tall order, especially given that emissions are currently going up, not down.
What needs to happen is that we need to use all the available tools we have in terms of policies, technologies, and we need to start to use them immediately. If that happens, then it is still possible, just possible, to limit warming to 1.5 degrees.
But we'll also need to develop technologies to take carbon out of the atmosphere, to balance out those emissions we can't eradicate. Trees are one way, but we'll need high-tech solutions too, and they have yet to be proved at scale. Now, making all these changes will cost money, but it will also deliver huge benefits, says the UN.
Your life will probably get better. That is one of the key results, because there are many co-benefits with these measures that are needed. Better air quality, better health, more active lifestyles, healthier food systems.
The authors of today's report are very clear. They say the fossil fuel era has to end, and end very soon. That conclusion, indeed all the conclusions in this report, have been approved by all the governments of the world. So the big question now is, will they enable the radical action today's report demands?
It was pedal to the metal last month as buyers raced to snap up gas guzzlers, utes and SUVs ahead of the dirty car tax introduced this month. Motor Industry Association figures show more than 21,000 cars were sold last month, nearly 8,000 of them utes. According to the MIA, the sales are the strongest for any month of the year ever by thousands. The data comes on the same day as that new climate report warning it is now or never to limit global warming, and there needs to be an urgent shift away from fossil fuels. David Crawford is the CEO of the Motor Industry Association and joins me now. Kia ora, David. Can you break this down a bit for us in terms of the sales? What were the most popular vehicles?
Evening. The most popular vehicle was the Mitsubishi Triton, followed by the the Ford Ranger, followed by the Toyota Hilux.
And for those of us not in the know, David, give us a brief description of what those vehicles are.
Those are what we call utes, the one-ton trucks, and they are used by businesses and farmers in the main.
And would they be vehicles that would be subject to the so-called dirty car tax, ute tax?
Yes, they would be. Most of those vehicles would attract a fee of somewhere between $2,500 to $3,500, or maybe slightly higher from 1 April onwards. So a lot of businesses brought their purchasing decisions forward to try and buy their vehicles before that tax takes effect.
And David, are we able to tell that it was businesses that purchased them, not just people who like the idea of a ute?
Yeah, we track long-term the purchasing patterns between businesses and private persons. So about 2/3 of new vehicle sales go to businesses and about 1/3 to the private sector.
And what about the cars that I like to call the town tractors or the SUVs? How did they go?
Well, the most popular segments for SUVs are the compact and smaller SUVs. The other interesting trend, and a good trend in terms of reducing emissions, was the increased sales in pure battery electric vehicles. There were 1,700 for the month, which is up on previous months as well.
But there were still high sales in that SUV category, which, in the scheme of things, are slightly bigger vehicles.
Yes, they are, but passenger cars and SUVs are also, more and more models are coming out with lower emitting engine technologies, hybrids, plug-in hybrids. So we'll expect to see CO2 emission reductions occurring in those sectors as we go forward. Options to replace utes are probably still, in the main, 2 to 3 years away.
Yeah, so if you genuinely needed a light commercial vehicle, a ute, if you're a tradie or a farmer, what were your options if you did not want to buy a car that would attract what people call the ute tax? Is there actually an option?
So there are some commercial vans available that are plug-in hybrid or electric, and there is one electric ute coming to the market this year, but the options, by and large, are not a lot at this point. You either buy a high-emitting CO2 vehicle, or you keep your old vehicle. So overall, how did that month compare with other months? Well, it's singly the largest by over 4,300 vehicles. It is a huge month. It was larger than I anticipated, but we knew that there would be what we could call distortions to the market, people bringing purchasing decisions forward. We expect to see far fewer sales of utes in April and May, and probably going on for the rest of the year. So perversely, the clean car tax sent people in their droves to buy high emission vehicles. Yeah, every time the government brings in a tax, there are changing purchasing patterns before and after the tax. But if the government doesn't bring in if it doesn't bring in the clean car discount, then it's not really helping us change patterns. The clean car discount, in terms of rebates for low emitting vehicles and fees for higher emitting vehicles, will help to drive change in vehicle purchasing patterns. Yeah, so what are your expectations then in terms of those buying patterns, and what that is going to mean for demand for second-hand clean vehicles and prices? Prices of low-emission vehicles, EVs, are higher than their internal combustion engine counterparts. That is true, but we expect in the next 3 to 5 years for them to become more affordable. And as more people who can afford new vehicles buy them, they will eventually come into the car fleet as second and third owner vehicles at reduced prices. So we'll see that trickle-down effect, but it's going to take time. And the clean car discount is sort of aimed at trying to kick that along faster than what would otherwise have been the case. David, what do you reckon is the price point that you would define as affordable then? If you're saying, third-hand vehicle getting affordable, what price is affordable? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer because it varies for so many people. But if you have a look at the average income, most people would struggle to pay more than $20,000 to $25,000 for a vehicle. So as long as we can get those vehicles in the fullness of time to below that, then we'll see an uptake. Good to talk to you, David. Thanks for joining us. That is David Crawford, who's the CEO of the Motor Industry Association. So big sales there in vehicles that would attract the levy. It is 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And homai o whakaro, we would love your feedback. Nō reira anei na kaupapa mō te hōtaka nei. Those vehicle sales figures coming out on a day where we've had a stark warning here. What is it going to take to change people's behaviour around cars and petrol cars? Do we need to have carless days? What do you think will do it? Send me your ideas. Text me, pātui mai, 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz.
President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited the Ukrainian town of Bucha to see firsthand the devastation left by Russian forces. The visit comes after the world has reacted with shock and horror to the images of civilian bodies lying on the streets of the once prosperous town. The US wants Russia suspended from the UN Human Rights Council, with President Joe Biden saying Vladimir Putin should face trial over the alleged war crimes. World Watch's Polina Lau has more.
As Russian troops withdraw from around Kiev and the town of Bucha, the extent of their brutality is becoming clearer. Shocking images of bodies lying in the streets and bodies half buried in shallow graves. One man, Vlad, has been helping gather bodies found.
People have been shot in the head by Russian snipers. People on bicycles, people delivering potatoes. I can tell you so many stories, but I don't want to. I want to forget them.
Western journalists have reported seeing a mass grave in Bucha. The town's mayor says up to 300 civilian bodies could be buried there. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has been visiting Bucha and says it's clear Russian forces have committed genocide.
For Russian soldiers that treat people worse than animals, that is real genocide. What you have seen here today, what you can see, thousands of people that were tortured and killed.
Evidence of the atrocities is growing and the horrific images have led to global outrage. US President Joe Biden has called President Vladimir Putin a war criminal and is calling for him to face trial.
We have to gather all the detail so this can be have a war crime trial. This guy is brutal, and what's happening in Bucha is outrageous, and everyone's seen it.
US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says there is growing evidence of war crimes but has held back from calling it genocide.
The images that we see are tragic, they're shocking, but unfortunately, they're not surprising. We released information even before Russia's invasion, showing that Russia would engage in acts of brutality against civilians, including targeted killings of dissidents and others they deemed a threat to their occupation.
Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says the images are shocking.
There is certainly evidence of what you'll see many leaders describing as war crimes, indiscriminate killing of civilians, reports of civilians being raped. I have seen some myself that are outside of the public domain, and it again reinforces to me the importance of New Zealand's efforts to ensure that Russia is held to account through the International Criminal Court.
National Party leader Christopher Luxon says the evidence is compelling.
Well, look, officially, you've got to be prosecuted and convicted before you get labelled a criminal, but I'd have to say to you the evidence is pretty compelling. The evidence is there. I would be quite comfortable calling a war criminal.
Until now, New Zealand has only sent non-lethal aid, such as body armour and helmets, to Ukraine, but ministers have not ruled out sending weapons like Javelin missiles. Russia's response to the global anger and condemnation? Denial. Moscow says images are staged and fake. The US says there will be more sanctions against Russia this week, and it's pushing to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council. Countries are continuing to expel Russian diplomats. Germany has expelled 40, while France is sending home 35. Lithuania has thrown out its Russian ambassador. President Zelensky is vowing to zealously pursue the allegations of war crimes against Russia. He says Ukraine will work with the EU and the International Criminal Court to identify the perpetrators. He's calling on Western leaders to impose more sanctions, saying the punishments must finally be powerful.
And a bunch of you getting in touch about the rush to buy utes prior to new taxes coming in this month. This listener says we deserve all the weather can throw at us, especially farmers buying gas guzzlers. Gavin has got in touch. Hi, Gavin here. I have a Mitsubishi Triton. I bought it in 2018 as it is more economical than the company car, which he says is a Holden Astra. It uses less fuel than many cars. And Richard's got in touch to ask, why can't tradies or farmers just buy a trailer? Someone let me know, why can't they just buy a trailer? Or keep their existing vehicle, says Richard. Do keep your feedback coming. Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. When is a nightclub not a nightclub? A so-called grey area in the COVID-19 rules means some bars and venues have been hosting parties despite the red light setting without enforcing mask wearing or seated service, having advertised the events as private. Katie Todd reports.
This is the sound of a nightclub in Christchurch at the end of last month. A video shows people crammed around a set of DJ decks dancing without masks. It would be a breach of COVID-19 red light rules for hospitality, except this was advertised to Facebook followers of the DJ as a private 100-person ticketed party. According to the Unite Against COVID-19 website, private events with exclusive use of a hospitality venue can go ahead without face masks, distancing or seated service. A search of social media reveals dozens of similar events at nightclubs have happened around the country in recent weeks, with more set to go ahead over the next 2 weeks. This bar owner in Auckland says it's a known grey area in the rules.
I was told that this was a way of getting around it by someone who did maybe half a dozen of them in the last lockdown.
He's hosted 2 private parties since January and has a third scheduled later this month, which he thinks will be a sellout.
It does seem a bit weird that I can do that and there's no restriction inside, like people can dance and hang out, and whereas otherwise it's sit down. But, I mean, with two venues, I've probably been affected, probably more than anywhere else in the country, I think.
Restaurant Association Chief Executive Marissa Boudoir says venues hosting private parties are simply following the rules provided by the government. But not all venue owners are on board with the idea. Tim Ward runs the Wellington nightlife venues San Fran Abandoned Brewery and Club 121, which have all been shut since the end of January. Although he's heard of a number of private parties happening in Courtney Place bars and clubs, he's chosen not to follow suit.
The risk is that my customers are angry that I'm behaving irresponsibly as a business owner and start to look at my business as not something that they wish to support anymore. It also leaves my staff exposed.
Tim Ward says it's somewhat understandable that other venues are taking that risk.
There's a small sector of the hospitality sector which is late bars, nightclubs and music venues, and we're all doing extremely badly right now, and they will be under intense pressure. I understand that why they'll be making poor decisions like this.
But he says the surge of private events should be exposed because cutting out any potential spread of COVID-19 means all venues will get to open sooner. In a statement, the agency in charge of COVID-19 compliance at venues said it hadn't taken action to venues hosting private parties to date.
WorkSafe hasn't taken enforcement action for the behaviours you describe, but will follow up under our Educate First approach if concerns are raised with us.
RNZ also asked the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, which is in charge of the traffic light rules, if it could clarify what defines a private event. It did not answer the question, referring RNZ to the comment from WorkSafe.
Meanwhile, a popular Dunedin bar is sticking with vaccine passes even though they're not compulsory anymore. As of midnight last night, the requirement for passes and most mandates expired. But for Woof Bar, vax certificates are a keeper. Owner Josh Thomas joins us now. Kia ora, Josh.
Kia ora, Lisa.
Hey, why are you keeping vaccine certificates?
Our primary reason is the safety of our staff and our patrons. I work on the bar every night we're open, and I get a good feel for what's important to our patrons. And they've really been quite overwhelming in their response, in that they're a pretty sensible lot, actually, quite pragmatic in their own way, and they really do want us to keep them. And probably more than that is the people who are not coming in at the moment. We have a lot of people, a lot of our regulars, a huge amount actually, who are not coming in. And I know they're not coming in because they don't feel it's safe to yet. So we want to do everything we can to let them know we're making the place as safe as possible.
How many staff have you got and how do they feel about it?
We've got about 15 staff, that includes casual staff, and I did send out an email to them last week to get their thoughts on it, and they were quite relaxed about it, actually. I think, though, I don't want to speak for them entirely, but most of us have had COVID, so of course, once you've had it, the pressure does go off a little bit because you feel like you've got this, probably slightly misguided, but you've got this 3-month grace period. So that might be part of it, but I think they're also trying, they recognise from a business point of view, and they see not as many people are coming in now, so they probably want us to get back to normal, and who doesn't?
So, Josh, have you been hit quite hard by having to isolate and staff having to isolate?
We have. We went through the first wave here in Ōtepoti when the students, the student cases started coming through. We got it then, so we're through the worst of it now. But probably more than the isolating, we've just suffered like everyone has over the last 2 years. For us, it's just been, a real challenge with a drop in numbers and restrictions and stuff. It's all had a big impact on us personally and professionally over the last couple of years. But, we're all boxing on and trying to do what we think is right.
You've got no concerns that some customers will stay away because you are keeping passes?
No, I think some bars may have that problem. For us, I think it's the opposite. I think most of the people who are coming in at the moment will be really happy to see that we're doing this, and that's certainly the feedback we're getting.
Lots of hospitality and entertainment industry really were keen to go to orange, right, because of the seated and single server and the cap of 200. I mean, how do you feel about the fact we're still stuck at red?
Well, yeah, I must admit I would have rather we kept vaccine passes and went to orange. I'm just sort of getting on with, keeping things going. I'm not overly, I don't know the precise reasons for that decision. I would love to get rid of table service. But, I also recognise
Why is that, Josh?
Still, well, table service is lovely, but, when you've got 80 to 100 people, that's a lot of labour, a lot of drink orders, a lot of delivering, and there's a wonderful freedom that comes when people can move around the bar, at will. However, the numbers are high, Lisa, so we're hyper aware of that, and we don't want things. We support a step-by-step approach. As desperate as we are to get back to normal, we support a cautious approach.
Josh, just before I started talking to you, we had a story about some venues. What they're doing is they're selling tickets, right, so that they can say it's a private event. Then people don't have to sit down. They don't have to wear face masks. They can dance. There's no social distancing. So they've kind of found a grey area. You're not tempted by the grey areas?
No, Lisa. No, I can be a rule breaker at times, but not in terms of COVID. There has been a little bit of that down here too, and there's been quite a lot of chat around hospo being a little bit pissed off about that, actually, because while we're all slaving, providing table service and losing a lot of money each week and looking after everyone with all the care that we can, it's pretty annoying to know some people are just, cynically ignoring the rules.
Really appreciate your time, Josh. Thanks so much for joining us. That is Josh Thomas from Wolf Bar, and they are keeping vaccine certificates. Kia ora e te iwi e haere nei e a checkpoint, the highway carve-up that is dividing Palmerston North locals. It reads like a Shakespearean epic full of drama and bureaucratic disasters. Yes, people, it's local government elections. It is time to get excited. And Hawke's Bay has plans to crack a high-value nut, the almond. Homai o whakaaro. We would love feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. The text is 2101. Tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now. Anei a iwi mina pita pita kōrero.
Jacinda Ardern has rejected claims by Russia's embassy in New Zealand that the images of atrocities being committed in Ukraine are a hoax. The embassy made the claims on Facebook, describing the footage as a staged provocation. Ms Ardern says she disagrees and has warned against disinformation on social media. President Volodymyr Zelensky has visited the Ukrainian town of Bucha to see firsthand the devastation left by Russian forces. The visit comes after the world has reacted with shock and horror to the images of civilian bodies lying on the streets of the once prosperous town. A growing number of countries are calling for a fresh wave of sanctions against Russia, and European leaders will consider cutting back on Russian fossil fuel imports by 2/3 this year. Fewer people are in hospital with COVID. Today there are 692 people in care, falling from 734 yesterday. Just over 14,100 cases have been reported, and the 7-day rolling average of cases is still dropping. 23 deaths were reported today. Volcanic tremors on Mount Ruapehu are now among the highest levels recorded in the past 9 years. The temperature of the crater lake has also continued to rise. The Workplace Relations Minister says the Fair Pay Agreements Bill will stop the race to the bottom on wages. The legislation has passed its first reading. It will create a new system for workers and unions to negotiate minimum pay and working conditions across industries. Michael Wood says it will give workers who were relied on during the pandemic, such as cleaners and security guards, livable wages. And Waikato University's Bachelor of Climate Change has begun this year and is the first of its type in the world. Dean of Science, Margaret Barber, says the degree was born out of frustration that climate change scientists, such as herself, were being ignored. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Kia ora rā e ho no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint ko Lisa Owen tēnei. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa in Naianei, ko Nona Peltier. Nona, businesses being urged to change the way they manage inventory. Ooh, this sounds exciting. Tell us about it.
Well, some people probably are familiar with the term just in time. This is an inventory model that's been around for about 30 years or more. And it's one that assumes that you can order up what you need and it arrives in some timely way, say within 6 weeks or a week or what have you. And this is how we've been operating, or businesses have been operating their inventory management for decades. Well, some advice is that you should move from a just-in-time inventory model to one that's called just-in-case. And that's really to manage the ongoing supply chain disruptions that are looking like they're going to continue for some time. We're seeing that played over with shipping and air freight and the costs and just, the shutdown of manufacturing in China, for example, where we've seen it's really difficult to pick up the parts that you need, whether it's a vehicle or what have you. So the company called JLL, it's a professional services firm. They're recommending that businesses do something now to change the way they deal with their supply chain. That means spending a little bit more on inventory, holding more inventory in place, planning for that next project, but not going so far as to start hoarding, which is something we have been hearing about. Don't do that because overall the industry needs supply. And if somebody is hoarding, well, that means somebody else isn't getting.
And Nona, the government's finances have stood up better than expected. How much better?
Actually, quite a bit better. So the official figures show there was a deficit of $8.3 billion for the 8 months ended in February. That's $4.4 billion better than was expected. And the reason why is that expenses were lower by about $1.4 billion. And they collected more tax, $1.8 billion more in tax. But the Minister of Finance is warning that even though these are better than expected numbers, that doesn't count yet all of the Omicron costs associated with that. So this is only just to February, and here we are in April, more costs to count. But overall, a pretty strong position.
And Nona, let's take a spin around the markets, please.
Yeah, interesting times. I'll just pick up that Asian stocks were a lot higher this month, at this point than a month ago. And that's probably because of some broad gains we've seen on Wall Street. Now, that means that we closed up more than 0.5%. Or 68 points to 12,121. What's much more interesting on the markets today was that the New Zealand dollar spiked up to 69.8 US cents and 53.2 British pence following the Reserve Bank's decision to hold its cash rate at a record low of 0.1%. And that means that our New Zealand dollar also dropped back to 91.8 Australian following that decision. So, interesting times in the markets. We shall bring you up to date again tomorrow.
Thank you, Nona. Nona Peltier there with Business News. Ka kite. And it's local elections year, which means politicians up and down the country are strutting their wares, hoping to be re-elected or to pick up a seat for the first time on the powerful local bodies. Auckland's mayoral chains are up for grabs this year, with Phil Goff bowing out to head to the UK. And it's not the only mayoral race shaping up as hot property. Our reporter Rosie Gordon reports on the ones to watch.
It's election season, local body elections, that is.
I am really excited to officially put myself forward to become your next Mayor of Wellington. Well, today, Auckland Councillor for Manukau, Efeso Collins, confirmed to us that he's decided to run for the biggest city's top job.
Today I thought it was time to announce, to say, hey, here I am, Auckland, I'm going to try and get around to meet as many of you as possible and see if you're willing to put your trust in me as your civic leader.
Candidates Tory Whānau and Efeso Collins in our two main cities, Wellington and Auckland, announcing their mayoral bids. It's these mayoral races University of Auckland political scientist Dr. Lara Greaves reckons will be among the most interesting this time around.
So I would say the classics are always sort of the bigger cities, so Auckland and Wellington. I think a lot of people will be looking at the race in Auckland, given that the incumbent mayor, Phil Goff, is moving along. And we've seen Efeso Collins be very vocal about wanting to be mayor and go for mayor.
Efeso Collins isn't alone. Among those vying for the Super City's mayoral chains are Heart of the City boss Viv Beck, former Far North Mayor Wayne Brown and hospitality businessman Leo Malloy. Dr. Greaves thinks the race could cause ripples on the right.
I think that we're seeing candidates in the Auckland race that are potentially in that more disgruntled right-wing side of things. I think the effect of that's likely to be a splitting of the right vote.
Voting across the country won't take place until October, and Aucklanders we spoke to were struggling to engage in the elections just yet.
The candidates seem pretty anonymous. I've seen a bit on the news as candidates have announced. I actually saw someone in a Vote Malloy T-shirt earlier on today, but that's about as much as I've seen.
I don't follow it, so I don't really onto it. So
does it bother you too much? Who's gonna run the city?
Not really. It's all the same.
In the capital, one candidate is officially running for mayor so far, former Green Party Chief of Staff Tory Whānau. Labour MP for Rongotai, Paul Eagle, has told RNZ he's considering a mayoral bid, while the current mayor's yet to make any announcement.
Andy Foster, who's the current mayor of Wellington, has faced various scandals or people kind of accusing him of various things. For example, he recently met with the protesters and around Parliament. The councillors on the council have kind of not been particularly happy with some of his actions.
These Wellingtonians we spoke to weren't keen on the idea of Andy Foster standing again.
It doesn't appear that he's done much, and the city seems to be disintegrating before our eyes. But I don't know if you can pinpoint that on one person. Do I think he should run again? Possibly not.
I personally don't think he's done a great job in terms of like the investment in like the get Wellington moving. I think pass that on to someone else.
I reckon that he hasn't got a second term in him. Yeah, Andy Foster promised a lot and didn't deliver much, really. That's bottom line.
Political scientist Lara Greaves says Invercargill's worth keeping an eye on too. Southland District Mayor Gary Tong is challenging long-standing Mayor Tim Shadbolt.
Tim Shadbolt's been mayor there since 1998. He's also faced a few minor level scandals and councillors speaking out about him. He's had a few public health issues that he's been kind of quite vocal about publicly.
In Tauranga, there'll be no election this year. The council was sacked a few years ago and commissioners were brought in, and the local government minister is leaving them there for now. Christchurch will also get a new mayor. Former Cabinet Minister Leanne Dalzell will hang up the chains this year.
Rotorua Mayor Steve Chadwick is one of several mayors to be stepping down this year and joins us now. Hi Steve, why would people put themselves up for these positions given some of the antics and the bureaucracy and the in-house squabbling? Why would you?
Oh, kia ora, Lisa. Well, because you love it and because you love your place. And for me, I think I had 12 years in central government and this will be my lot of 9 years here. That's a lot of public-facing service, but I still love it, even though I know there are people very polarised about where we're going. I'm actually proud of what we've done, and there are enough people out there in the community, Lisa, that say, I want to pick it up and I want to lead a strategy too for the next 9 years. So there's a lot of interest in this locally, and that heartens me, but it could go anyway.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are you able to get done what you want to? Because if you look around the country, Invercargill, Tauranga, Wellington, Thames Coromandel, those are just some of the councils that have had infighting and dissent and, you know, are you actually able to achieve things?
Well, we've been fortunate here, Lisa, because even though we've got quite divided. We've got a majority that believe in the vision we set 9 years ago, and so we're able to get stuff done. And actually everything was going really well here till COVID hit, and with international tourism, bam, we were hit hard, really hard. So there are people that think they might do it differently, but yes, we've been able to achieve what we set out to achieve. Pity about the major disruption of COVID and international travel.
If you were writing a situations vacant for your job as mayor, what would it read?
Community service on steroids, Lisa, and love it. You see sides of the community that the public doesn't see, and you see one good thing happening and you go, yeah, that's why I stood, and you see more of that than you do the negative stuff actually in the social media. So, look, anybody that's got the skills and also the staying power and a bit of strategy can build a great team around them and certainly get stuff done locally. I've loved being a mayor.
Then why aren't you sticking around?
I've had my fair share, really. Actually, Lisa, I do believe in renewal. And 9 years, I think it's time to stand back and let someone else go through. I'd rather make the decision that it's time to go, uffy through and support new people that are interested. I'm having lots of coffees around town at the moment, Lisa, and helping anybody that really wants to know what's it like, what's service like, how many hours is it.
How many hours is it, Steve? What are you telling them when they ask that question?
80. If you're going to run for mayor, it's a weekend job as well as a week job. And I start at 7 in the morning and it goes, 12 hours a day.
Then you've ruled out a huge chunk of the population, 80 hours. Is that healthy? And also, who with family commitments or any other element in their life can do it?
Well, I think that's sort of me. That's the way I work. But I've learned to delegate so much more and a great team around you. And so you hand stuff over. You don't have to do those hours. My family laugh that I go to the opening of an envelope. But, Lisa, I go because I love the community and I see people in there and they're always saying, what do you do about this? What do you do about that? You're an amazing signposter as a mayor. You're saying this is where you go. And I think there are people prepared to give community service. The only thing I think, in all honesty, those that I've asked that I see do have vision, strategy and governance skills, so I wouldn't do it for the money and not the hours you work.
So should mayors get paid more and should councillors get paid more?
I do believe that, and you can say that when you're going. If you say it, it's the kiss of death along the journey. But I do think you do need to be remunerated better. I think about the level of a backbencher, absolutely. And, consider it. I dropped salary to come in here, but I did it because I was ready for it.
Do you reckon that's part of the reason that we don't get some candidates? They're out in the private sector.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the feedback I get for those that I think, you are a ripper of a director, you understand governance, you've got good people skills, have a look at it and think about it. And they do, but a lot of them say, no. And what it is more, Lisa, now is social media. So they can.
What do you mean? People slamming you on the social?
Hatred, absolute hatred, bullying, and what we've learned about attacks on women MPs. We sure get it as women mayors. A lot of bullying, a lot of online intimidation.
Have you had to take someone to task for that or complain to the cops about it?
Yes, and lots of threats. So, but I'm a bit of a tough old bird because I've been around for a long time. And actually, Lisa, I had the same when in government's sponsoring the smoke-free environment bill. So I learned to get really tough then. But I believed in doing the right thing at the right time, and I still do in local government.
So, Steve,
call them out. Yeah.
Cabinet minister versus being a mayor or a councillor, which is the tougher gig?
A mayor.
Why?
you can't run anywhere. I used to love going down to Wellington because that was 3 days, where I could immerse myself in there and look at the policy and the direction of where the country's going. As a mayor, it's every day, including the weekend. And your public property, ask my kids, they don't like coming out with me because people come up and they moan about the grass verges, the trees that haven't been trimmed, all sorts
and the
of
rates,
things.
Steve. They moan about the rates
and
too.
The rates,
so we're almost out of time. So give me a quick answer to this, but I'm interested.
Yeah.
If it's so damn exciting and everybody wants to complain about what council is doing, why do only 40% roundabout of voters bother to turn out and vote in the local body elections?
Yeah, because I don't think they find what we're doing is relevant, and we've got to make it relevant in their lives.
Thank you for your time, Steve. That's Steve Chadwick, who is outgoing Rotorua Mayor there. And let's get to some of your feedback now. Lots of it coming in on the purchases of utes and other vehicles just before the new tax came in. Aaron says, it's an absolute fallacy that tradies need utes. If you go to any European country, tradies don't have utes. So what do they drive, Aaron? Get back to me, 2101 on the text. This person says, for getting people out of cars, I use public transport to get to and from work. However, I would use it a lot more if it was more frequent and reliable. Transfers between trains and less frequent buses are a major issue. That's interesting, given that the government's moved to cut the price, not the only factor in use. Another person says to incentivise electric car purchases, AT needs to change its flawed strategy of tackling congestion, transit lanes, to EV and electric vehicle lanes. That's an interesting one. Should we do that? Let us know your thoughts, 2101. And Leslie reckons it would be good if someone could come up with an inexpensive way to convert existing vehicles to electric. That would save all the current petrol and diesel vehicles being written off and dumped. And Phil has got in touch to say, hey, Radio New Zealand, swapped my work ute for an Outlander hybrid plug-in, 4-wheel drive, 1.5 tonne towing, all the good statistics. And Phil reckons saves 5k a year in fuel. Thanks for your feedback, 2101 on the text. Workers in our key business districts are returning to offices of dusty desks, blank screens and staff rooms that for once don't stink of your workmates' leftovers. I feel you. Now that some vax mandates are a thing of the past, outdoor gathering limits are increasing and businesses don't need to ask for vaccine passes. The working from home experiment is for some over. Sam Ollie reports.
Auckland's Omicron peak has passed and the migration back into our business districts has begun. Microsoft New Zealand's latest work trend report found 1 in 3 Kiwi employers will ask teams to go back into the office full-time within the next year. Telco Spark reopened all of its corporate offices across the country this week. Dairy company Fonterra did the same, inviting back 1,500 workers at its HQ in downtown Tāmaki Makaurau. About 50% have taken up the offer so far. Vodafone has 2,000 office-based staff, and the vast majority have been working remotely since mid-January. But next Monday it's reopening its Christchurch, Wellington and Auckland bases, with split blue and yellow teams working alternate days. Employees will also need to return negative RATs before they come in. For now, Auckland Council's corporate offices have an occupancy threshold of 20%. Corporate Services General Manager Rob Irvine says most people are choosing to stay home.
Just last week we had about 10% in terms of our occupancy on our buildings.
The council did away with vaccine passes at all its sites and facilities today.
So at the moment we've got around about 7,700 staff, and just over 100 of these staff are recorded as being unvaccinated.
Further down State Highway 1 in Hamilton, the City Council's also renounced mandates today. It has just over 1,300 staff and 20 haven't had a jab, but Chief Executive Lance Vervoort says he's not had any negative feedback from employees about ditching the mandate. The council's called on almost 50% of staff to return to site.
It's a little bit slow on that uptake. We've probably got 25% of our staff have come to the office, but our leaders have been talking to our people, and it looks like more people are going to come in over the next week or so.
Lance Vervoort says it's still unknown whether the council will ever have 100% occupancy in the office again, but he says flexible work options will remain. Council of Trade Unions President Richard Wagstaff is urging employers to maintain flexibility like this.
You can wave the rule book around to prove that you can do this or you can do that, but really the best thing to do is to talk to your staff.
He says if people are forced to come back into the office unwillingly, they might just find a job somewhere else.
Wimbledon is reportedly close to banning Russian tennis player Daniil Medvedev from this year's tournament. The 26-year-old has won 13 ATP singles titles and was world number one for a few weeks this year. For more, we're joined by sports reporter Felicity Reid. Kia ora, Felicity. What's going on here?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, the hosts of the Wimbledon Grand Slam, the All England Tennis Club, have found themselves in a bit of a unique position. As a privately owned tennis club in London, they set the rules about who they let in. And reports out of the UK are suggesting that this could just as easily extend to international tennis stars as it does to Joe Blogs off the street wanting a hit around on the famous grass court. So while most of the other main tennis events have maintained a neutral stance on the war in Ukraine, there is a scope for the All England Club to ban Russian and Belarusian players from the Grand Slam in June if the players don't condemn the actions of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Currently, Russian athletes can compete in the main tennis tours, as Medvedev did last week in Miami, on the proviso that they compete without the Russian flag or the national anthem, similar to what we've seen happen at the Olympics. But the England Sports Minister Nigel Huddleston has said the Russian athletes should only be allowed to participate in sports events in the UK if they sign what is being called an anti-Putin form. Basically, Huddleston is wanting athletes to provide a written declaration that they're not getting money from Putin, Russia or Belarus, and that they won't make comments at these events or at all in support of Putin. So there is some concern in some circles in the UK about it being a bad look if Medvedev were to win Wimbledon and how this could boost Putin's regime. So this is where the All England Club can really look at taking a strong stance of stopping Russian players playing, because again, as a private club, there's less room for players to legally challenge the decision. Where there's been concern from other events that Russian players could take the event organisers to court for restraint of trade or something similar if they're banned from playing or, prevented from doing their job. But the All England Club will have protections driven by their membership and the club policy that other events don't. So the entries are closing for the third Grand Slam of the season midway through next month. The work is being done to get a club policy in place so that the Russian players know whether they'll be welcome or not.
That's really interesting, Felicity. Before we move on to Tiger Woods, I'm wondering what our audience thinks. Text us on 2101. Do you think that Russian athletes should be banned unless they sign some kind of disclaimer denouncing Putin? Interested in your thoughts. 2101 on the text. Tiger Woods. OK, what's happening there? Will he, won't he?
It seems like the 15-time major champion is a bit of a draw card whether he's committed to an event or not. Woods has yet to sort of say whether he's going to play the Masters, which tee off at RNZ National on Friday. He's calling it, in a very un-golf term, but a game time decision on whether he'll play his first tournament since the 2020 Masters. But he was on the course in Georgia, practicing with Fred Couples and Justin Thomas. He was causing a bit of a stir. He drew a massive crowd to the first tee. I'm talking 10 to 15 rows deep of people watching this practice session. And I should say, for context, we do need to remember it was only 14 months ago that the idea of Woods getting around a golf course again was in doubt after a car crash which left his right leg in quite a bad state. And at the time it was said it could have been a career-ending injury. So whether or not he'll tee off for real and in pursuit of a sixth green jacket will be clearer tomorrow, because that's when he's scheduled to speak to the media ahead of the tee time announcement.
Thanks, Felicity. That's RNZ Sports reporter Felicity Reid there. The fallout continues after Will Smith's Oscar behaviour. The Hollywood star is now in danger of losing out on major new projects following the slapping incident and his resignation from the Academy. CNN's Brian Todd has more.
Tonight, the fallout from the slap heard round the world continues to reverberate throughout Hollywood.
That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow.
Actor Denzel Washington, who along with actor and producer Tyler Perry was seen talking to Will Smith during a commercial break at the Oscars after Smith slapped Chris Rock, has spoken publicly for the first time. Washington was asked about that moment when he appeared at Bishop T.D. Jakes' Leadership Summit.
Fortunately, there were people there, not just me, but others in the Gap. Tyler Perry came right immediately right over there with me, and some prayers, keep it. I don't want to say what we talked about, but there, but for the grace of God, go any of us. Yeah. Who are we to condemn?
This moment, too, was the subject of TV mockery.
Keep my wife's name out your mouth! I'm going to, okay?
When host Trevor Noah made a brief joke about it at the Grammy Awards.
We're going to be listening to some music, we're going to be dancing, we're going to be singing, we're going to be keeping people's names out of our mouths.
The question now, what will all this mean for Will Smith's career and his future projects? Both The Hollywood Reporter and Elizabeth Wagmeister from Variety are reporting that at least one movie Smith was working on is now on hold following the slap.
At Netflix, he has an action thriller that was in development called Fast and Loose, and that has been put on pause.
CNN has reached out to Netflix for comment. We haven't heard back.
Right, let's get to some of your feedback now. I'm told someone got in touch to say that in Europe, tradies don't really use utes. They use other vehicles. Asked what they do use. Someone's saying transit vans, but Simon reckons they're still pretty thirsty as well. On hospitality, we interviewed the owner of Wolf Bar, who's keeping vaccine certificates even though he doesn't need to. You love him.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, kia ora tātou. I'm Evie Ashton. The Greens co-leader James Shaw has condemned Russia's President Vladimir Putin as a ghastly human being, but says the Prime Minister's right not to call him a war criminal. Jacinda Ardern yesterday declined to use those words, saying that was up to the International Criminal Court to determine. She did say, however, that every piece of evidence points to the fact that war crimes are being committed. Mr Shaw agrees with the position.
I think he's a ghastly human being, and he's causing mass death and suffering for thousands of people and the displacement of millions of people. It is absolutely appalling, the war that he has started.
The US President Joe Biden has called Putin a war criminal, while Poland and Spain are using the term genocide. Satellite images released by the US space technology company Maxar appear to contradict Moscow's claim that the killing of civilians in the Ukrainian town of Bucha happened after its soldiers had left. The cause of death isn't immediately clear. The BBC's Peter Bowes reports.
Russia has flatly denied that its soldiers murdered any civilians and insisted that photographs showing the bodies were fakes. But satellite images analysed by the New York Times appear to show that many of the civilians were killed more than 3 weeks ago when Russian forces were in control of the town. The newspaper says a before and after analysis of the imagery shows objects of a similar size to a human body between March the 9th and 11th in the precise positions where bodies were found after Ukrainian forces reclaimed the town last week.
The Prime Minister says the New Zealand economy will continue to be hit unless there's urgent action to avoid global warming. A new IPCC report has outlined what action needs to be taken to avoid 2.7 degrees of global warming, a catastrophic direction the globe is currently headed to. It says people need to dramatically change their behaviour. Jacinda Ardern says New Zealand is weeks away from sharing its emission reduction plan.
The time for action is now. New Zealand's economy will keep feeling the hit of climate change unless we do our part, and you'll see soon the plan that we're laying out as a government to ensure that happens.
The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, says New Zealand is willing to tackle climate change, but the work should have started decades ago. A popular Dunedin bar is sticking with COVID vaccine passes, even though they're not compulsory anymore. Wolf Bar owner Josh Thomas told Checkpoint that he's keeping a requirement for vax passes for the safety of staff and patrons. He says his customers want him to keep the passes, and he's expecting business to improve once punters know that they're still required. Josh Thomas says most of his staff have had COVID and his business has been hit hard by the Omicron wave. He prefers a cautious approach to lifting COVID COVID restrictions, but says he would have liked to have seen a move to orange in the COVID traffic light system, with vax passes still required. The Workplace Relations Minister says the Fair Pay Agreements Bill will stop the race to the bottom on wages. The bill has passed its first reading this afternoon and is now headed to the Select Committee stage. It'll create a new system for workers and unions to negotiate minimum pay and working conditions across industries. Michael Wood says it'll give workers relied on during the pandemic, such as cleaners and security guards, livable wages.
This bill is for Mele, Malia, Jason, Wael, Connor, Wheeler and Morris. It is for those workers who help make our country but have been left out in the cold. It is about the dignity and the value of their work in our society. It is about fairness.
National and ACT both oppose the bill, arguing it's unionism by stealth that will impose more costs on business. Police in Tonga say a New Zealand couple found dead at their resort home on the island of Vava'u were electrocuted. Today they released the names of 47-year-old Ben Rocky Neal and 49-year-old Rochelle Neal, who ran the popular Hakau Adventures. Deputy Police Commissioner Te Vita Vailea says their bodies were discovered by police at their home in the village of Utungake on Saturday afternoon. Mr Vailea says a formal inquest has confirmed electrocution was the cause of death. And volcanic tremor levels on Mount Ruapehu are now among the highest levels over the past 9 years. The temperature of the crater lake has continued to rise and is now at 36 degrees, up 4 degrees in the last 8 days. GNS Science says tremor levels remain elevated and the crater lake has changed to a grey colour as upwelling waters have disturbed sediment on the lake floor. It says the results to date are typical for the beginning of a heating cycle, with the exception that tremor values are unusually high. GNS says the activity is consistent with elevated volcanic unrest and the volcanic alert level remains at 2. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Tony Stamp samples the latest from Aldous Harding. Jeff Wilmot teases out the plausible from the sci-fi narrative of the classic Alec Guinness comedy The Man in the Self-Washing White Suit. And Ralph Sims discusses energy in the light of the war in Ukraine. Why doesn't Europe just cut off the gas pipeline with Russia? Maybe we shouldn't close the Marsden Point oil refinery. And other stories on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
You're back with Lisa Owen and Checkpoint next. First, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Wednesday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel and Bay of Plenty. Mostly cloudy with a few showers. Thunderstorms are possible for Northland and Eastern Bay of Plenty tomorrow morning. From Waikato to Wellington, also Taupo, Taumarunui and Taihape. Isolated showers are turning to rain this evening with some heavy falls and possible morning thunderstorms for Taranaki and Waitomo. Rain is easing tomorrow evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly fine. However, there's scattered rain tonight and tomorrow morning. A few showers are developing in Wairarapa tomorrow evening. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, becoming fine tomorrow. A few showers for Nelson, but there's brief rain tonight and again tomorrow afternoon, and then it's fine. Marlborough and Canterbury, scattered rain is developing this afternoon. It's becoming widespread tomorrow morning and then easing tomorrow evening. For Otago and Southland, occasional rain or showers. And for Riekohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy. A few showers tomorrow and then rain for tomorrow night. It's just gone 7 minutes past 6. We'll have news headlines for you at 6:30.
Kia ora rā e ho, nau mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Legislation that will radically overhaul workplace laws in this country has flown through its first reading. The Fair Pay Agreements Bill will set up a new system for workers to negotiate minimum pay and working conditions for entire industries. The bill is poised to pass under Labour's majority government, marking the biggest shake-up to workplace laws since the Employment Contracts Act of 1991. Our political reporter Annika Smith has more.
The Fair Pay Agreements Bill is a Labour manifesto and portfolio priority patently close to the heart of Workplace Relations Minister Michael Wood.
This bill is for Mele, Malia, Jason, Wael, Connor, Wheeler and Morris. It is for those workers who help make our country but have been left out in the cold. It is about the dignity and the value of their work in our society. It is about fairness.
The legislation will allow workers to force their employers to negotiate minimum pay and working conditions for industries. Michael Wood says fair pay agreements will stop a race to the bottom on wages.
The global pandemic has reminded us of the value of much of the work done in our communities that has been undervalued for too long. We've gotten through COVID together, and as we build back better, it is time to deal with some of the long-standing inequalities that have been exposed.
Part of the government's reasoning for the new laws is to create a level playing field where good employers are not disadvantaged by paying reasonable industry standard wages. But its existence depends entirely on Labour, both National and ACT promising it wouldn't survive under their watch. National's workplace relations spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says it's not about fair pay.
It is about the government imposing mandatory union deals on Kiwi workplaces. Now, let's not make any bones about this. There's no choice involved, either for workers or for business operators.
The ACT Party also vehemently opposes the bill, its workplace relations spokesperson Chris Bailey arguing workers are already free to join a union.
This bill amounts to unionism by stealth and will simply make it tougher for businesses who have struggled to keep trading through a 1 in 100-year pandemic and who continue to struggle with the never-ending costs imposed on them by this government.
The proposed fair pay agreement system is not compulsory, requiring either 10% or 1,000 workers' support or a public interest test to be met to trigger the process. Michael Wood says those suggesting otherwise are being disingenuous.
Debate based on misinformation and scaremongering will take us nowhere and will be seen by New Zealanders as a desperate smokescreen to block progress.
The Fair Pay Agreements Bill has now passed its first reading and is headed for Select Committee. It sounds nuts, and it is, a plan to grow eco-friendly almonds in Hawke's Bay. The Ministry for Primary Industries is kicking in $67,000 for a feasibility study to see if the crop can be grown sustainably in the region. Now, the project's also being supported by local government and nut spread company Pico Productions. The goal is for cattle and sheep farmers to use some of their land to plant almonds. Hawke's Bay grower Tony Kuklinski has really paved the way for the crop after basically stumbling across a couple of trees and eventually working out that they were almonds.
We had a series of 3 real bad droughts here, and I was working for farmers in central Hawke's Bay, putting in landscaping and putting in a maintaining country garden. And it was pretty miserable, and I've got a hort degree, and I sort of noticed that there were 3 trees in my area that flowered and nutted every year, and no one did anything to them. No one knew anything about what they were or what varieties they were. I found out they were almonds, obviously. And it just went from there.
In the Hawke's Bay, is that the right place weather-wise? Because almonds, well, they're sort of like a Goldilocks crop, aren't they? A bit temperamental, not too wet, not too frosty, not too cold, please.
They love the heat. And central Hawke's Bay, you know, when somewhere like Napier on the coast is reaching 30-something degrees, we might be 5 degrees warmer because we haven't got sea breeze, because we're so much further inland. And that's happening in February when they're trying to dry on the trees. So it's sort of perfect, actually, here. They don't like wet feet. Like, I planted them early on next to a leaking water trough, and that killed them. But apart from that, they're fine.
So in terms of this trial, what's the measure of success going to be for it? I mean, and do you know how many farmers you want to have a crack at growing them?
Well, we're not up to the trial yet. What the funding that's come through is to write a report to prove that almonds are a viable and probable commercial future crop. Ideally, the next step after this is to bring in new varieties so we could trial that, and I'm prepared to donate some land, and I think there's some local Maori that are prepared to donate some land, so the trial could be perhaps based in central Hawke's Bay, but perhaps extend the trial further. That'll have to be a long-term one for a few years, because you have to have the trees in the ground sort of 5 to 7 years before you know what's going to work, and then we go from there.
I know the goal is to produce basically an eco-friendly crop, right? So almonds are thirsty, aren't they? They use a lot of water.
how we currently produce them, especially the ones coming out of America, where they're grown in the heat of California on bare soil, on slightly raised beds. Californian heat. Yeah, you have to pour the water on.
So how are you going to do it differently?
So what I've done here is kept the pasture. I'm personally organic and have mould drained the soil underneath so the water still runs away. And I've come up with a couple of varieties so far, just experimenting with what we've got here, that are possible future commercial.
So would your goal be to just create a niche market with a unique selling point, or what's the aim?
I saw these trees. I planted a couple of varieties, and then after a few years, once I tried some and eaten fresh off the tree, the taste was amazing, and it just doesn't compare to anything you get in a supermarket or a health food shop. Because if you think about those ones, they might be 6 months old and they've been on a ship.
So obviously there is a nut spread company who is involved in this trial. Is that where your almonds go, into spreads?
Well, I did a couple of week business course last year just for fun during the dry, and made a nut butter, and I picked the nuts, shelled them, borrowed the organic calf in Napier. The lady there with the dag to work with, she put them in the oven for 10 minutes. She yelled across the counter because I'm out the back, and she said when the smell hits her, they're ready. So you pull them out and then put them straight through into a jar through the nut butter machine while hot. And the taste of that was just amazing. So when it came to the pop-up shop, they all sold within 3/4 of an hour, I seem to remember, once I started giving out tasting. Yeah.
I love the exact science that you used with that, Tony. Has the smell reached you? Okay, get them out of the oven. What about milk? Do you make milk with them?
I haven't yet, but almond milk is just almonds and distilled water overnight, isn't it, Billy? I'm a dairy farmer's son from Taranaki, so I haven't gone that way. I still drink the other stuff.
Are you excited about the prospects that there are potentially for this crop?
Oh, I think it's huge, and it could be fantastic for a small community like Central Hawke's Bay as well as the rest of the Bay. New Zealand imports more than 40 million a year of almond, and if we actually have some nice tasting ones and grown sustainably, and it could provide land diversification and jobs. It could be just awesome to be at the start of creating an industry.
And that is Tony Kuklinski, who's an almond grower. Let's get to some of your feedback now. On hospitality, we spoke to the owner of Wolf Bar in Dunedin, Josh Thomas. He's keeping vaccine certificates, right, even though he doesn't have to. You really like him in his attitude. Kevin says, so nice to hear of a business owner with empathy for more than his bottom line. And another person says, if I lived in Otepoti, I'd definitely be sporting Josh. He's got the right attitude, ngā mihi. And Heather from rural Wairarapa says, love that guy from Wolf Bar, an adult with realistic and mature overview of where we are at in New Zealand. So much whining and complaining from so many people who are whinging regarding not being able to live just like 2019. There's a pandemic, you idiots. Pivot, says Heather. On gas guzzlers, this person says, ridiculous that most gas-guzzling ute and SUV owners are buying into macho advertising and promotion rather than a genuine business need. Ian reckons, same as cigarettes, put the price of fuel up over time. That's to get us out of our fuel-based cars. And this one says, climate change experts today have been calling for a halt to sales of diesel and petrol by 2030. Not long enough for most Kiwis to change their habits and get into EV vehicles, Julian says. It is unaffordable and will hit the poorest the most. Instead, we need other approaches to get the most out of our existing fleet, such as carless days and more rideshare journeys. Would you go without your car? Could you go without your car for a day? Let us know. 2101 on the text. It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Protecting cyclists from traffic on a small stretch of Palmerston North Highway has divided opinion among locals. And after a controversial trial that's lasted more than a year, the future of the Cycleway is about to be decided. Our Manawatu reporter Jimmy Allingham has more.
They arrived in March last year. Dozens of brightly coloured planter boxes filled with sand line a 1.5 kilometre stretch of one of Palmerston North's main entrances from Wellington. The boxes on Main Street are a trial to keep cyclists and motorists separated. Reaction then, and now, is to the point.
I hate the planter boxes. I think they're ugly. They're awful. We've got a nice road and you've got these awful planter boxes. I don't call them planter boxes, I call them troughs.
But local Christine Edwards says she's okay with the cycleway separated by more traditional means. Others RNZ spoke to on the city streets aren't even sure if that's necessary.
I think it's a hazard, especially when you're coming around some of the corners. They're right there, and it's just an eyesore.
The sooner they get rid of it, the better. It to me is a real obstruction in the road, and quite honestly, I don't think I've seen 3 cyclists in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I reckon get rid of them as well, eh? Like, they're just big in the way, really. They're ugly as well, they're eyesore.
Yeah. My opinion is that they're an eyesore, and they're very dangerous on a wet night. You can't see the damn things at all, and for the amount of people that cycle down there, I don't know why we've even got them there.
The trial is 90% funded by Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency, and City Council officials report it's been a success. They're recommending City Councillors vote tomorrow to introduce a permanent cycleway, although the planter boxes may go. Officials say there have been few crashes and more people are cycling the route. People such as Colleen O'Byrne, who says it's a blessing.
Oh, look, it's invaluable. On a highway coming into the city, it's just invaluable.
How often do you use it?
Every day. Twice. Yes. I think I feel a lot safer. Yes. I mean, you've got to pay more attention if you're on the road. But this is good.
Other cyclists RNZ spoke to also felt safer riding with a barrier between them and other vehicles. But people who work next to the cycleway, such as car dealer Brent Boddy, say they hardly see anyone riding it.
Look, I can see where we want to go with this, and I think it's a good idea, but the sheer lack of numbers of people using it to the administration of it, the cars crashing into it, the containers falling over, the sand on the road surface, it probably doesn't warrant it right now.
City Mayor Grant Smith says the planter boxes took elected officials by surprise when they suddenly appeared. He's in favour of a separated cycleway, but wants the planter boxes gone.
It's a matter of getting things in balance. So should we have a cycleway there? Should we have a protected safe cycleway? Absolutely yes. But should it be planter boxes? No. So I'll be voting that it is removed, but it is replaced with something far more traditional.
Grant Smith says hatred of the planter boxes may have sown the seeds of an urban myth that nobody is using the cycleway. Officials say 6 cyclists an hour used to bike the road. 2 months into the trial, that had increased to 17 an hour.
Let's return to the Ukraine now, where it's been 39 days since Russia's unprovoked, brutal invasion. The UN Refugee Agency estimates more than 4 million people have fled and 2.5 million have crossed into Poland. But as CNN's Kay Young-La reports, thousands of refugees are now making the difficult decision to return home.
At the bus station in Warsaw, Poland, the platform is packed. But not with people arriving from Ukraine. They're heading back. Reality of life as a refugee more unbearable than war. Katerina Wolf says after 2 weeks, she's returning to Kyiv.
What is it like trying to live away from home all this time?
So bad. Because you don't know what's wrong with your relatives, with your family.
It's not a permanent way to live.
Yeah.
The Polish government says 2.5 million Ukrainians have come in since the war began. As of this weekend, 442,000 have gone from Poland back to Ukraine. Housing is a problem as Poland struggles to absorb the influx of women, children, and the elderly. Poland's residents have welcomed Ukrainian families into their homes, but living on strange floors and out of bags can only go on for so long. Poland allows Ukrainians to work and collect government assistance, but there's the red tape, standing in long lines with fellow war refugees to file the proper papers. And then there's childcare and schooling, trying to raise kids with new language and cultural barriers. Poland wants to help, but nearly 6 weeks into this war, the signs of strain are getting harder to ignore.
The Polish people will welcome Ukrainians, whatever happens, because they are fighting for our freedom, and we do understand that. But of course, there is a certain limit, human limit, what we can do.
When you say you're at capacity, what do you mean?
The population of my city has grown almost by 20% in a month. So of course, it puts an enormous strain on the city, on its services. And we are doing our best. We are welcoming everyone who needs help, but improvisation has to end.
some of the stories that we're hearing from these passengers who are heading back into Ukraine, a pregnant woman who says that she does not want to give birth in Poland alone, that her husband has remained in Ukraine to fight in the war. She wants to be with him. Another woman who owns a business who says her heart is shattered into a million pieces being here in Poland. She plans to try to pick up her life in Ukraine. This bus to Lviv has just pulled up. It's going to be leaving in minutes.
Thousands of people are protesting in Sri Lanka over shortages of fuel, food and medicine. The demonstrators are calling for the resignation of President Rajapaksa, accusing his government of mishandling the economy. The BBC's Rajni Vaidyanathan reports from Colombo.
They're calling it Sri Lanka's Arab Spring, a mass uprising in a country on the brink of economic collapse. People have had enough of food and fuel shortages and daily power cuts.
A few moments ago, the street lights went. People are waving their phones in the air for light. This is another moment of solidarity in a country which was once deeply divided by civil war.
As the desperation's grown, so have the protests.
Why are you here today?
To show the disbelief that the people of Sri Lanka have in this government and to show how they have failed us as a nation.
I mean, people can't afford their daily rice, their dal, their basic necessities. People can't get on buses to come to work, to go to school.
How much worse can it get? There's no petrol, there's no diesel, kids can't sit their exams because there's no paper.
People have been queuing for hours just to get cooking gas. The country struggled to import basics after foreign currency reserves ran low, in part due to a drop in tourism. Prices are now sky high. At the local market, we met advertising executive Rajiv.
This is an apple. It used to cost what? A year ago?
1 year ago, we will buy from 100 rupees or 3 pieces, means
So
30 rupees.
30 rupees. Now, how much are the apples
Right
today?
now, 1 piece is 100 rupees, no? See, 150.
150. So the price
rupees.
of this apple has gone up by 5 times in a year.
Sri Lankans blame the country's president Gotabaya Rajapaksa for mismanaging the economy. Seen as a ruthless politician, he's clinging on to power, even as the entire cabinet quit. Tonight, protesters gathered outside his office in the capital, demanding he resign. An island nation in turmoil, running out of the basics and running out of patience.
Elon Musk is one of the world's most colourful corporate characters, a persona he's been able to magnify through Twitter. Now the technology tycoon will have an even bigger say in the Twitterverse after buying a major slice of the company. So how will the billionaire use his newly purchased power on the platform? The ABC's Matt Bamford reports.
Elon Musk always has something to say, and when the world's richest man tweets, people listen.
I use my tweets to express myself. Some people use their hair. I use Twitter.
The Tesla founder has sparred with Russian politicians, sold flamethrowers and sent stock prices spinning, all in under 140 characters. Now the super user is buying in, spending $4 billion to become Twitter's largest shareholder. And if his past comments are anything to go by, it could be a wild ride.
You use your tweeting to kind of get back at critics. You kind of have little wars with the press.
Twitter is a war zone. If somebody's going to jump in the war zone, it's like, okay, you're in the arena. Let's go.
Tama Lever is a professor of internet studies at Curtin University.
It's been a platform that's been of a relatively stable size for quite some time as well. And I think Musk showing not just interest in Twitter, but actually, buying up a stake really means that Twitter is back on the radar in a way that perhaps it hasn't been.
Shareholders have been buzzing. Twitter's stock price jumped 27% after the announcement.
For Twitter, it's actually quite an exciting time because obviously Musk is deeply invested in his idea of what freedom of speech and freedom of expression means. And I think him bringing that perspective to Twitter at a time when platforms are perhaps under more scrutiny for regulation and things like that, is a really interesting time.
But Musk's relationship with the platform has been fraught at times. He was sued for calling a diver who rescued children from a Thai cave a pedo, and his tweets about Tesla drew scrutiny from US financial regulators. And his determination to say what he likes might cause some to worry.
Twitter has been one of the forerunners in platform responsibility. Currently, there is a ban on micro-targeting of political ads on Twitter, which we see as a really positive development. And Twitter's also been at the forefront of placing friction around the way that disinformation can be spread.
Professor Peter Lewis is from the Australia Institute's Centre for Responsible Technology.
The idea of somebody with a real commitment to libertarian notions of free speech makes you wonder whether the platform will evolve in a way that some of us would see as being a step in the wrong direction.
Before we head off, some of your feedback on whether Russian athletes should have to sign a declaration against Putin in order to play at key events. David says absolutely, Russian sports people and others must denounce Russia's invasion of Ukraine. No denounce, no play. Another person says the tennis players signing a waiver. What guarantee do the players have that Putin won't take a personal affront and poison them? It's asking them to decide between their jobs and their safety, which is unfair. On Hawke's Bay's aim of becoming an almond growing district, Dave says, aren't almonds thirsty? Yes, they are, but they're trialling, less thirsty varieties and a different setup to make sure they don't need as much water. This person suggests they grow pomegranates too. Love a pomegranate, but you can never get the seeds out of them. Bloody impossible. Anyway, if you missed anything on the show, you can find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō. Tomorrow from 5 a.m, a revered Goldie painting is expected to fetch up to $2.5 million at auction this evening. And the director of the International Art Centre, Richard Thompson, will be live on First Up. So get out of bed early to listen to that. It will be worth it. Have a fantastic night. Kia pai tōpō. We'll catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. The Greens co-leader, James Shaw, has condemned Russia's President Vladimir Putin as a ghastly human being, but says it's up to the International Criminal Court to determine if he's carrying out war crimes. Parliament's gone into urgency to pass legislation discounting road user charges by 36% as part of a package to ease the pressure on fuel costs. And Jacinda Ardern says the New Zealand economy will continue to be hit unless there's urgent action to avoid global warming, and the government is weeks away from sharing its emission reduction plan. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at